I don't want to keep you too long. We have hopefully a productive discussion to have, so we're going to jump right into it. My name is Jared Broadway, and in addition to a few other things, I am the founder and president of Vitality Site. So Vitality Site's an emergency preparedness consulting firm that can pretty much teach your company anything from diversity, equity, and inclusion to active shooter, implicit bias, the whole gamut. So we're like your full service education firm. But what brings us here tonight, we're going to talk about an issue that happened up in Somerset County that most of us are familiar with. So we'll lay it out, and then I'll play the video, and I'm going to really be your facilitator. It's not going to be me sitting here talking to you for an hour or an hour and a half. I said an hour and a half, but if we end early, that's fine. We just really want to spark a healthy dialogue and get you to think about some things that maybe you didn't think about before. So perspectives. The whole world is based on perspectives. You can have a set of identical twins in an identical situation, and because of their perspectives, they're going to see that situation differently. It doesn't make one right. It doesn't make one wrong. It doesn't make one's perspective better than the other, but different, because what's inside of us is really what shapes how we view the world. And over the past pretty much 2 years, it seems like almost monthly, if not more often, we're bombarded with these images of perspectives that some people say, I don't see anything wrong. And some people say, well, I see everything wrong. So we're going to talk about one incident in particular. But before we get into that, bias, because there's no way we're going to get through this without talking about biases. Everybody in here has some sort of bias, and it doesn't make you having a bias, doesn't make you a racist. It doesn't make you a bigot. It doesn't fill you with hate, but biases are formed because our brains are bombarded with millions of stimuli every minute, and there's no way that it could wade through it. So your brain determines what's important, what's not important, what's a threat, what's not a threat, and how you should proceed through life. Sometimes, however, they affect how we treat people. Peanut butter and jelly. You say peanut butter and jelly, some people think best lunch ever. Some people think, I can't stand it. I would never put that in my mouth. That's a bias. If you don't like peanut butter, that could be a bias. It doesn't make you a racist because you don't like peanut butter or you don't like jelly. But when you treat people differently because maybe they do like peanut butter and jelly, that's where the problems manifest. So I'm going to play the video. It's about 25 seconds long, and then we're going to jump into the discussion. So stand by.
Oh shit! Yo! No. Chill. Brian, get up, Brian. Oh no! Holy fuck! Yo, it's because he's black. Racially motivated.
So, what do we see? We saw what appeared to be two teenagers engaged in some sort of physical altercation in a mall. I will say at the outset, we don't have all the information. It is an ongoing investigation, but since I'm not investigating the incident, I'm here as a member of the community just like you. And a little bit about my background. In addition to owning Vitality Site, I'm also a police officer and a paramedic. So I can speak to some law enforcement issues, and I've got some experience dealing with these types of issues. So I can kind of take both perspectives. I can see the perspective of a police officer, the perspective of the father of a Black son and a Black daughter, the brother of Black brothers. I can speak to a lot of what's going on and what a lot of you are thinking and a lot of you are feeling. So in the video, we see Kai and Joseph, engaged in a fight in the mall. I don't know if the police were dispatched there for another call, but if you noticed how quickly they got there from when the fight actually started to when they arrived on scene, it was about 15 seconds. So that would lead me to believe that they were already in the mall. For what? Not sure. They come upon the fight. Then what happens? There was, at this point, Joseph, which is the white kid, is actually on top of Kai, which is the black kid. The male officer pulls Joseph off, kind of shoves him to the side. The female officer goes off to deal with Joseph. The male officer takes Kai to the ground and he puts him in handcuffs and he detains him. Eventually, once he's in cuffs, they got him up, and that's when the video stopped. I've heard people talk about the use of force and the excessive force. Again, we're not really here about that part because based on what we saw, like from a law enforcement perspective, the force was proportional to what they were up against. It was physical force being used against each other, and the officer used physical force to take him down and accomplish his objective. I don't see anything wrong with the actual initial interaction and the force that was applied. However, what we do see is how was that force applied, to whom the force was applied. More importantly, the force was applied disproportionately to Kai, who was the young black man. And he was the one that was taken to the ground. He was handcuffed and eventually let up. We don't know what happened when the video stopped, but all this transpired while Joseph was seated on the sofa. Kind of like, it was almost like the officer showed up and Joseph was perceived as the victim and Kai was perceived as the aggressor. Again, we're not there. We're not in their minds. We don't know what was going on, but based on the limited knowledge that we have, what we saw in the video, it would appear that Kai was treated as the suspect and Joseph was treated as the victim. How did the officers arrive at this? And we're not in their heads. The investigation is still ongoing, so we don't have that answer right now, and we might never have that answer. But perception, a lot of things sometimes they say perception is reality. And a lot of what we perceive, what happens, how things transpire, we can draw our own inferences. We have to be careful with that because your mind can take you into different places. But at this one, we would be remiss if we didn't address the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is, it looks like the officers, like I said, singled Kai out as the aggressor, decided that he was a bigger threat and used the amount of force necessary to accomplish their objectives. People are up in arms because the governor made a statement and he called the behavior or the video alarming or disturbing. Disturbing, I think he used. And people say, well, it's an ongoing investigation. He shouldn't talk about it. He should just keep his mouth shut. Agreed. But anything can be disturbing. Disturbing doesn't mean right, doesn't mean wrong. If you see somebody get run over by a car in a car crash, that's disturbing. It doesn't mean that one driver is at fault or that they did it on purpose. So I think that we should all be able to agree that at its face value, the video was disturbing. What I want to talk about is how did we arrive at the officers determining who the primary aggressor was and then the course of action that they took. So let's, one possibility we're going to talk about is implicit bias. And I'm not going to read a lot of slides. This is really the only definition we're going to talk about. Implicit bias, attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious way, making them difficult to control. Key word, and it's highlighted, unconscious, meaning I don't think that most people in most situations walk up and say, you know what, there's X type of person. I don't like people over 6 feet tall, so everybody over 6 feet tall is bad in my mind. No, there's something in their mind that they're probably not aware of. That's why it's an implicit bias. It's an unconscious decision that controls the way we act. So what we need to do is acknowledge that biases exist and then determine, okay, how do we root out these biases to make sure that they don't interfere with our actions? Because the biases aren't going anywhere. And the bias isn't necessarily by itself the problem. When they interfere with how you treat people, how you perform your duties, how you interact with people, how people are punished, the amount of force used, that's when the bias becomes the issue. So that is the key. That's what we're going to talk about. again, it's a difficult topic. It's a difficult conversation. It's an uncomfortable conversation because people don't like talking about matters of race. People don't like talking about religion. However, from my perspective, I see this firsthand. And we talked about perspective initially. My perspective is going to be different, and I would like to think that I have somewhat of a unique perspective because I'm a Black man and I live in the United States of America. And whether or not you believe it, there are people that look at me differently than they look at other people. However, I'm also a police officer. So when I put the uniform on, it's almost like I get a pass. And I can walk into any store USA, and as Jared Broadway, the police officer, I'm like, "Hey, officer, how you doing?" And I get some head nods and smiles. And if I go back to that same store, and this is the true story, we're not going to put the retailer out there. However, I, as the police officer, was in a store, arrested somebody for shoplifting. 3 hours later, I go back to the store on my way home, and I don't wear my uniform home. So now I'm just back to Jared Broadway, the Black dude. And I noticed the loss prevention person following me around the store. And at first I thought he passed by the end of the aisle. It's like, chance encounter, whatever, he's going somewhere. I recognized him immediately because I just dealt with him 3 hours ago. And then two aisles down, I see him pass by the other side. And then he's slinking behind me in the same aisle. I'm grabbing pancake mix, and he's shuffling boxes around at the other end of the aisle, pretty much doing nothing. And at that point, I realized that, you know what? This guy is following me around the store. He doesn't even realize that I'm the cop that was there 3 hours ago to handle the shoplifting. And that's what a lot of people, that's a perspective that a lot of people will never have. Like, I went literally from police officer coming to do the job and help you out to suspect just because of what I look like. I didn't walk in with a trench coat in the summertime. I didn't walk in with a sign like, "Hey, I'm here to steal stuff." I didn't park a car in the fire zone and leave it idling with the trunk open so I could throw all my stolen goods in there. No, I just walked in the store, and for whatever reason, I was deemed a threat. So if those situations, they affect everything. They affect how law enforcement enforces the law. They affect how educators teach. They affect healthcare. They affect pretty much every aspect of our existence. What we need to do, first thing, raise awareness. Because if we just hope the problem goes away without doing anything about it, we already know that's not going to happen. We have to, one, acknowledge that there is a problem. And for some people, and maybe even some people on here, it's difficult to even say, you know what, there is a problem. This incident was problematic at the least, maybe not racist, maybe not filled with hate, but problematic, and from a few different angles. So I am going to open it up if anybody wants to talk, because really, I don't want this to be about me. I want to give everybody on here the chance to talk. So if you can raise your virtual hand, and I'll unmute you. You can say what you have to say, and then we'll try to have a healthy dialogue. I will ask that we remain respectful, because we're all in this together. Everybody that logged on to here, like, you have shown an interest in making us better, because this can't be an us versus them. Like, we need to be in this together. We need to acknowledge the problems. We need to check our own biases. We need to check biases that we see around us, so that we can just be a better country, a better city, a better state, a better everything. So I will, at this point, raise your virtual hand. Even if you don't have anything to say, can somebody raise their hand so I can see if I can actually see your virtual hand? And then we'll go from there. I see people moving, but I don't see any virtual hands.
Yeah, Jared, there's like 3 out there that I can see, mine included.
All right, so let me, you know what? I probably have to stop sharing my screen. All right, I had to stop sharing my screen. Now I see some virtual hands. Let's go with Donna Williams.
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, I'm driving, so that's why my camera's not on. Good evening. I really appreciate you having this dialogue. Should I call you Jared or Officer Broadway?
Oh, I am Jared. Like I said, I'm just a regular dude that's here to talk to everybody.
No, I really, I'm just kidding with you. I really appreciate you having this conversation. So my question is, I get implicit bias. I really understand the concept and the idea that people have it. What I want to know is how does it come into play when you're an officer and you should be objective. I mean, and look at the situation. I'm thinking that handling that situation, and maybe you could correct me because you are an officer and you know how some of these things are handled. I'm thinking one officer should have taken one kid and the other officer should have taken the other kid. And then in my mind, that would have been fair and that would have been equal for them to have been detained and the fight broken up in a manner that would have been, both of them would have been held to some standard of the same standard, I should say. So I want to know why that wasn't done. And is that how things normally are? And we get the impression as African Americans that is the way things normally are, that we are considered the aggressor. Why?
Okay, so great question. And since I wasn't there and I wasn't in the officer's mind, I'm on the outside looking in like you. However, I could say, if I had handled that situation based on what we saw, because I don't know what the officers there smelled, heard, other than what was in the video. But based on what we saw when they arrived on scene, yes, it typically would have been handled that way. Officer one handles one suspect, officer two handles the other. If they need additional officers would come in. And I mean, we always try to, whenever possible, for safety reasons, if ideally we would have two officers for every subject or every suspect. That wasn't the case here, so I would have at least gone 1-1, unless there was some indication that, okay, maybe additional force is needed. And from what we saw in the video, it appeared that Kai immediately complied once he was prone meaning laying on his stomach, and the other officer was handcuffing him. Did not appear that he was resisting. We couldn't hear what he was saying, what, if anything. But now the female officer actually joined the male officer and they got Kai in the handcuffs. At one point, Joseph stood up off the sofa and he was standing over both of the officers. And for whatever reason, it appeared that they still didn't really feel that he was a threat. And that's one of the questions. Okay, why didn't they feel that he was a threat? Like, what made Kai such a threat based on the behavior that we saw? And now Kai's under control. You have subject number two, whom you just saw fighting. So you knew that he was actually fighting. And he's standing over you and you don't deem him a threat. And it goes back to what's in your mind. Like, what have you already determined is a threat? And if you say, again, Donna, I'm not saying that this was the case with these officers, but in any job, if you say in your mind that Black people are more dangerous than anybody else, then when you show up on the scene and there is a Black person and somebody else, in your mind, you're like, okay, I have to be more cautious of this person because I know they're more dangerous. And that's what we have to judge cases on their individual merits and just educate officers. Like, kind of, who knows if that was his thinking, why is that his thinking, and what can we do to change it? Sometimes people are who they are. Sometimes they don't even realize that they're singling people out or that they have these thoughts. So that's why it's like an onion. You have to peel back the layers of the onion to get to the root cause of it and then address the root cause, and hopefully it will. But if we never have the discussions and then the subsequent training, we're never going to peel back those layers of the onion. So did that answer your question from my perspective?
Yes, that does answer the question. But of course, within that, it raises another question. Why do people feel that way? You know, that's something, like you said, you can't answer because you're not in their minds. And so to change that whole perception, I think that that's a whole nother conversation that we can't cover it tonight.
Absolutely. And this would be, I mean, realistically, we could do a full 8-hour day on this. And ideally, I would do it live and in person so we could have interaction and we can see each other's faces. But tonight, I really just wanted to raise awareness and get the conversation started, and we can talk about continuing it another time. So thanks for your question, Donna. And let me see who's next. I see a gal 8. Your hand was raised earlier, but it's down now. So if you want to, you can raise your hand again. And Clifton Knight has a comment. Cliff.
Hey, Jared. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I mean, just my comment, it was interesting almost towards the end of the video. It seems like, and I forget who you said his name was, the Caucasian, male. Is almost like he was ready himself to be cuffed. And that didn't occur. Once he saw what was kind of taking place with the other fellow on the ground. And I'm not sure, again, if maybe, because you're right, the audio wasn't as such where you don't know what was reported to the police officers when they arrived. If maybe someone says that they thought the other kid had something on him, I don't know.
And again, hopefully the investigation will play out and we'll have some more of those answers. But yeah, it did seem like the other kid was kind of surprised. Like he was just kind of sitting there, and then he got up and he walked around a little bit, and then he went and sat back down when the officers, like at the end, right when the video was stopping, they kind of shoot him away. But yes, the treatment was clearly different. And the big question is why? Why was the treatment different? Is there something that we didn't see that made it different? What was it about this situation that made, or is this how this officer handles situations? Does every fight that he goes to, he takes the people to the ground and puts them in handcuffs? Which, if it's a mutual fight and somebody's using physical force on somebody else, then that would be an appropriate use of force. So, like I said a few minutes ago, the force was applied.
Well, other than, I've talked to some other police officers and in a domestic violence scenario, right? It's almost like you're taught not to turn your back on anyone. Because who's to say that, while this other kid was just sitting on the sofa, while both of the officers were, their attention was on the one kid on the ground, that this guy couldn't do something to one of them.
Right. Absolutely. So there's some tactics in there and some officer safety issues that, I mean, that's another day. Like, we could really talk about this for a week. We can devote a week to implicit bias, a week to tactics, a week to use of force, and still not have all the answers. But again, it's talking. I think a lot of people in here saw the same thing and had the same thoughts, and that's good. It's good that we do see these situations now, and that we don't remain silent about them. And hopefully any law enforcement executives when you have an agency that doubles down on police do everything right, there's never anything we can do differently, and the other person's automatically wrong, that's problematic too. So sometimes acknowledging, yes, we can do things better, goes a long way toward rebuilding public trust. And training's not always the issue. People always say training. Some training's the answer to a lot of things, and I'm a trainer. Like, that is my thing. But training won't always fix what's in your mind. Discussions, you can work to uncover what's in your heart, what's in your brain, and how can you keep those things at bay. But just telling somebody to watch a video on use of force, that wouldn't have done anything in this situation, because there was something else at play that caused the officer to react like that. So I see Jasmine had her hand up. You still have something to say, Jasmine?
How are you? I am a wife of a cop, and I wish he wasn't at work, because I would have really liked him to be in this conversation. But anyway, my view of the video really is, when it came to the white boy, was that I saw less of shock. And I think it's so dangerous, because I think because of how society handles Black boys and white boys, I think the white boy knew he wasn't gonna get stopped. When he saw them run past him even though he was a one over them, and they ran to the Black boy, he sat down. It's funny, because I do have Black sons. I have a Black son and everything, and a Black husband. And my husband and myself would not have got off that chair. We already are accustomed to know you're gonna sit, you're not gonna get up. And watching him stand up, it wasn't shock. To me, it was so much of, ain't nothing gonna happen to me anyway, so I'm gonna stand up. and that's so dangerous because he's a boy, he's young, and that mentality becomes a man's mentality, and now they feel entitled. And I agree. I don't see it so much as racism. I see it so much as stereotypes. And stereotypes is so dangerous if you let it, it's like a fire. When you breathe into those ambers, they become a huge fire. And I think stereotypically, through the centuries, we do see Black people as aggressive. Even sometimes Black people, I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes I could be in certain situations and I will click my, I'll click my door to just make sure it's locked. And then I'll have to ask myself later, like, damn, why did I do that? Right. I think it's unconsciously, we have been trained, even Black people, to feel like sometimes we are the aggressors, we are the criminals. I don't know how to change it. I don't know how to change the mindset to feel like that. But I did, like I said, I did want to point out, it is dangerous that the boy, he felt like he was, like he was untouchable. And these people become grown-ups. And that Black boy is going to become a grown-up. And now he might teach his son and his daughter, you have to be afraid of the police. It's crazy because I see how my kids look at their father as a cop. And he's a cop for East Orange. And if he worked, we live in South Jersey, and I see that he's just so excited to see his dad in a uniform. And I can imagine if he lived in a different town where my husband worked, how his friends may see cops, so I don't know.
Absolutely. Where you are, again, it's all about, I said at the beginning, perspectives. And if the only time you ever see a police officer is when something bad's happened, and unfortunately in a lot of urbanized areas, that's it. So Camden Metro is a great example of getting rid of that stigma and getting back out into the community so they can build those relationships. Because if all you know about the police is they show up when somebody's fighting or somebody needs to get locked up, then yeah, you're gonna think, oh, the police are here. There's nothing good ever happens. So it's a holistic response. You talked about stereotypes, and a stereotype is a belief, and that's when people believe this is how they act. That's a stereotype. When you say this is how those people act, that's a stereotype. And then the next level would be a prejudice or a bias. Those are attitudes. And when you say, I don't like them because this is how they act, now that's a prejudice or a bias. And then the granddaddy is discrimination. I'm going to do blank because this is who they are, this is how they act. So yeah, they multiply. So we have to address the stereotypes so they don't progress into the prejudice and the bias and ultimately into the discrimination. So thanks for your response. Anybody else? All right, let's go with Terrell Watkins.
Good evening, sir. How you doing? And how you doing, everybody? Again, Jared, thank you for having this forum. I know sometimes it takes difficult, uncomfortable conversations like these to kind of bring things to the forefront so we can actually get ahead of it. I do disagree with some of the things where you say as far as training doesn't have anything to do with it. First and foremost, I've been a police officer, or I should say was formerly a police officer for 26 plus years. I've just retired probably about a little over a month and a half ago. And some of the things that we did in our organization, we constantly use that training module for ICAD training, or the critical decision-making module, to instill on our officers that we recognize the implicit biases you may have, but it's about recognizing them and then correcting them. Case in point, I was a part of Camden County Metro. I was part of it upon its inception. In 2013, we had many officers coming from everywhere but Camden, Point Pleasant Beach, Atlantic City, Monmouth County, and things of that nature. Those officers who wasn't really familiar within working in an urban environment. And they may have had, preconceived notions on this is how you handle things and things of that nature. But as the executive command staff constantly had these guys go out into the community wanting to build those relationships having those uncomfortable conversations like Jared actually just mentioned before you call 911, it helped break down some of those barriers and you get a little bit better of an understanding as far as who you are and who you're dealing with. And that was volumes. Again, I was part of the old Camden Police Department where it was just running and gunning. Like, you know, you ran, you locked them up. And I was from the city. I'm born and raised in the city. But to take a step back now, recognizing that now 8-9 years later, policing is going into a different paradigm now. And a lot of people may see, as Jared mentioned, as far as a perception of officers where they think that, like, you know, it's SWAT, it's this, and it goes a little bit deeper than that. And as much as it goes as far as for the police training and things of that nature, other people outside the police department, like in the private sectors and stuff like that, they may still have those own preconceived notions as far as how police services are run. And it's just, it's a holistic effort that we all have to kind of take a part of. And I know it's difficult. Again, a lot of people may have already had these impressions and implicit bias. I'll be the first one to tell you, I know I've had my own implicit biases before, but again, unconsciously, like, had to think against short people or tall people. It doesn't matter, but the more we realize that we all do have these implicit biases, and it's not a bad thing, but it's about recognizing them, moving forward, and then becoming a better part together to kind of like overcome all that. So with those officers there, again, I can't speak to as far as what was on their mind, but I know that they definitely could have probably benefited a lot from the critical decision-making module. I know that's a module that the Camden County Police Department constantly utilized in ongoing training besides the biannual training for use of force. Maybe that's something that the legislation can actually work towards, or things of that nature, but it's something that, again, it's not just a police thing, it's a community thing. So whether you work for GE, Comcast, or whatever, it's just something that we all kind of have to build better to get those uncomfortable conversations out and hopefully move things forward for the better. But thank you for the opportunity again, Jared. I appreciate it.
All right, and I appreciate the comment. And maybe I misspoke a little when I said training won't fix it. Training's not the only answer. And a lot of times it's easy to point to, when something happens, they automatically point to training. So training is an aspect, and pretty much in any good organization, you have recruitment, training, supervision, and policy. That's how you really determine what's going to be best. So training's not the only aspect. You need the other three and to bring them in to kind of round it out. But thanks for your comments, Terrell. And Voices Gathering Live podcast, you're up.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Officer Broadway, Jared.
Jared.
Thanks for having this platform to bring all the voices together, so that we can just talk about what we are feeling as we identify what's going on in our society, not only in this video, but this video being a channel for us to kind of hone in on. So I just want to reflect really quickly. Donna had said something, and I thought it was profound about how she was talking about how the officers had ran right past the Caucasian young male and immediately addressed the Afro-American male. And I'm more inclined to believe, because of the climate we're living in, that had there been two Black males, each of these officers would have apprehended both of these Black males, right? There would have not been one male not apprehended. I think there would have been a Caucasian person on each of these individuals, because that is the temperature we're living in. So when we're talking about this bias, when we approach people and how we meet them, I'm sorry, we cannot, stop. I'm sorry. We cannot help, but that's what's normally happening in our society today. Officers who are taking the oath to be fair, to use their education, their training, and how to approach a situation. Oftentimes in media, we're seeing that's not being done. And in this video, per se, we didn't see that happen. We saw the person of color being addressed by two white officers, and you can't help but believe that they stereotyped him and just saw him more as a threat than the other male. And my question to you is, along with training, what else can can we do as a community, but also the officers who are serving and protecting, honestly serve and protect with fairness?
All right. So as a community, we can do what we're doing right now. We can let people know that, okay, this happened and we want answers and we want to know what we can do to make sure it doesn't happen again, rather than just hope that it doesn't or pretend that it didn't happen. Address the issue and demand answers, demand accountability. And I think over the past 3 years, you've really seen an increase for demanding police accountability. Terrell mentioned being a cop in Camden. I'm sure if like what it was like being a cop in Camden in 1997 versus 2021 is completely different, because now what's expected of you is different. And the level of like now people are accountable. Do we have a long way to go? Absolutely. So I don't want anybody to misconstrue that, okay, cops are accountable now and all the issues are solved. No, but now people, when something happens, we're starting to see departments holding people accountable, and even, and when appropriate, criminal charges. And that's, again, that's a whole extra thing that we're not going to get into tonight. But there are accountability. And what can the department do, Diamond? Exactly what I just said. Recruiting, we have to go out and find the right people. And that can be tough, because now, I'll tell you that a lot of people don't want to be police officers right now. So recruitment, and then training from day one in the police academy. And once you graduate from the academy, it's not over. There's ongoing training, and we have to have the right kind of training. Terrell mentioned critical decision making. And that's part of the new use of force policy. So yes, that all comes into it. A lot of times you have to ask yourself, or the officers have to ask yourself, would I take the same action, or would I respond this way if the person I was dealing with looked different than the person standing in front of me? And if the answer is yes, then that could be a problem. If the answer is no, I would treat everybody like that. Depending on the situation, that could be a problem too. But if you're saying, if you stop and you take that objective look and say, self, if this was a white person in front of me, would I have responded the same way? And if you can honestly say, no, I wouldn't, then that's a problem. It's a start by acknowledging, okay, I have a bias that I've identified within me. Now, what do I do to correct it? So thanks for your comment, Diamond. And next, Mark's iPhone, and then Mark Farron. Mark's iPhone.
Hey, Jared. I got here a little late. I'm not sure if you touched base on things prior to the video that we saw. That it's more of a question. I'm only talking on the video itself. Did the fact of initial dispatch on onlookers that may have said something to the police, anything further that may have steered the police towards a specific person, shouting out of he has a weapon, or the guy in a jacket has a gun, all of these things, we don't know what was said prior to that video. And I just want to put that out there as just part of the thought process, that we're diving into this video and we don't know all the facts yet. And that's mainly, I just want everybody to realize that as a responding officer, they may have information that nobody is aware of, even at this point.
Right. And we talked about that, Mark. So thanks for bringing that up. We actually mentioned it several times from exactly what you said. They were there pretty quickly. So we don't know if they were there for another incident, because from when the video started to when the officers actually made contact was about 15 seconds. So they were already in the area. We don't know why they were in the area, or like you said, what info they had. All we can go is based on the outward appearance. And also said we would be remiss if it comes out, the investigation, that, okay, this is why this happened, and it was completely on the up and up. Okay, good. Was it still worthy of having a conversation? Absolutely, because there are times when it's not on the up and up. So yeah, sure. I think, and it all goes toward accountability and building that trust and that dialogue. And when people have trust in the system, or when their departments and agencies able to rebuild trust, then I think that goes a long way. So just, even if it works out that, you know what, this is why they did it, and it was 100% right, and every activist says, okay, now we understand, at least we had the dialogue and we've established those relationships. But thanks for bringing that up. Mark Farron.
I just wanted to echo the comments about community involvement. That's pretty much the biggest way to combat any instance of implicit bias. I'm a criminal defense investigator, and at the end of the day, what do we have? We have circumstantial evidence and direct evidence. That's it. That's all we have to go on. But if the community sees something, it just takes one Facebook post, and it may not make a difference in that particular instance, but 2 years down the road, there's a trail of this. That's something that could be used. You know, I mean, legally, if they lock somebody up, chances are they have them. We're beat. We got to do our best to work out what we can pre-trial. But it's so invaluable because if you call them out on their bullshit, people are going to see it. You know, it just and the court of public opinion is sometimes greater than the court of law. You know, so I mean that's.
All right. So I appreciate the comment. And I think one of a lot of these instances, people respond out of emotion. And we get it because it is emotional and you get it. However, being able to step back and determine, okay, what's reasonable, what's objectively reasonable, and what's the law say, what's objectively reasonable, and look at it that way. Because it's easy to, out of emotion, I can't believe that they did this. And even sometimes you have a phenomenon may be lawful, but awful, where everything that they did was lawful, but it still looked horrible, or there was still a bad outcome or an unintended outcome. But just being able to step back and take that unbiased look and say, okay, this is what happened. These are the facts, and as more facts come in, we're going to interject them into the equation and hopefully figure out what's going on. But the grabbing the pitchforks from the start.
No. I'm sorry. I didn't mean like aggressively, but see something, say something. That's right. Because then the more voices that bring it up, so it might end up being nothing, but. At the same time, it does end up being something, at least people are saying it,
Right. And now, I mean, we're living in the digital age. So cameras are everywhere. You pretty much can't go anywhere, drive anywhere, do anything without somebody recording it. So whether they're cell phone videos, officers wearing body cams, and even the transition to body worn cameras. I think if you polled in the beginning, yes, officers were leery about, I don't want to wear a camera because then they're going to see everything that I do. Now, the overwhelming majority of the time, the camera exonerates the officer, or it shows that what they did was lawful, or it was a best practice, it was acceptable. So yes, also, what does it do? It builds transparency. And you're able to say, okay, yes, even when the officers do mess up, all right, this is the video, this is they messed up, this is the discipline, and this is how we're going to fix it moving forward. So thanks for your comment. I'm going to get to Chanel in a minute. Let me address the comment in the chat box. It says, trust in law enforcement among many ethnic subpopulations is very low, and we can only go on what we see. Yes, again, I think Mark mentioned it and Terrell mentioned it, building that capital, building relationships. In some neighborhoods, the problems with police or the issues between the residents and the police go back generations. So you have a grandfather, a father, and now a son that all have issues. So are you going to walk in? Are the police going to put new patches on and paint their cars a different color and all of a sudden everybody loves them? No, you got to be out there. You have to get to know people. You have to build those relationships, just like meeting new friends. Just because you walk in and say, hey, I'm your friend now. No, I still have to prove that I'm your friend. And it's one little bit at a time, one act at a time, one car stop at a time, one arrest at a time. And when you do that 100 times, 1,000 times, and people see that, oh, you know what? They really have changed. And 50 out of every 100 arrestees used to come in all lumped up. And now only 2 out of every 100 arrestees only come in lumped up. Well, maybe that says something about what we're doing and we're on the right path. Chanel's iPhone.
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. So, we talk about community policing, but it's situations like these that have our children, and I'm speaking as a mother of 2 Black sons, that have them uncomfortable. My son, well, I worked for a police department and I made sure that I introduced my teenage son to every single officer that was around, because I don't want him stereotyped. I want them to know that, oh, when they see this kid, he belongs to somebody that comes from a good home, and et cetera, et cetera. But there's been plenty of times he's walked into a store and he has, the majority of his friends are white, and they'll stop him at the door and ask him for his receipt. And I'm like, to hear what one of the gentlemen said on this call, we don't know what happened before. We don't. But when that's always said, oh, we don't know what happened before. We don't know what happened before. What do you think that our Black boys are thinking? Oh, you know what? I'm not going to report this because it's always going to be something, or I'm always going to be the problem. So I don't know. When I saw this video, I was livid. And I even made a Facebook post saying that I'm glad that I was not there, because I would have been arrested, because I probably would have jumped on that cop's back knowing that it was wrong. But how many times can you sit back? I would have been fined for both officers taking down both of the kids. If the treatment was equal, I'm all for it. But now I have to say to my kid, you know what? I'm not going to drop you off at the mall with your white friends, because you can't do what they do. When they run out of stores and they're playing as children or teenagers, you can't do that, because you're always going to be looked at as the problem. So I don't know, this has me all worked up, but it's just like, when you hear the little, oh, you don't know what happened before, or just the comments that surround this, it's just like, this is part of the problem. We don't know what the call was originally. I dispatched for a town, so I know that I've gotten plenty of calls where it's, oh, this person I've never seen in the community. And most of the time, those phone calls were about a Black person. So it's just like, I don't know. I see it as racial. I see it in a lot of different. I'm just at a loss for it. And I'm like, if they don't make an example out of the officers, it's just going to get worse, because people are feeling like they're able to do things and just get away with it.
All right.
That's it.
I can definitely hear the passion in your voice, and I can appreciate with it. I can empathize, because also, as the father of a Black son and a Black daughter, I think I'm going to point out something that you said that you might not even realize. You said that I introduced my son to all these cops so they know that he comes from a good home. But the fact that, like, that's part of the deeper problem, that we even have to say, all right, I want you to know. That's like saying, okay, you're one of the good ones. So I want to make sure that they know that you're one of the good ones. And not a problem on your end, a problem on society's end, that now we feel as though, all right, I got to let somebody know that you're a good one. You're not a troublemaker. And I've had conversations with my son that I know that some of my white friends have never had to have with their sons, because he's looked at differently. He's going to be treated differently. And now he's a legal gun owner, and he lives in Virginia. He drove up to visit me one summer, and he has an SUV, and I was helping him grab his bag out of the back, and there was a gun box, and I flipped out. And he's like, oh, Dad, the box is empty. He's like, oh, that was the gun that I bought last month. It's just the empty box. I said, you don't have the privilege of driving around with a gun box in your car. He's like, well, it's like, one, we're not in Virginia. Two, if you get stopped by the police, you can almost certainly be assured that you're going to be deemed as more of a threat for a Black dude with a gun box in the back of his car than somebody else. And it's unfortunate that we have to have those conversations, and that we have to teach our kids how to act around the police, and some other people don't. But that's part of the deeper issue. That's where we as a society need to make the change to eliminate a lot of these biases. So thanks for your comment, Chanel. Oh, your hand back up, Chanel.
No, I don't think I know how to take it down.
Okay. Let me see if I can take it down for you. All right. I don't think I can take it down for you, but I'll just ignore it. So is there anybody else? I saw Jasmine's hand went back up and then it went back down.
No, I definitely wanted to agree with Chanel. And as soon as I saw her name, I knew she was probably going to say something. I definitely agree with her. And even thinking about dispatch and all that other stuff, we hear this all the time and we get frustrated, and we have children and it's like, okay, I hear that, I understand that, but what about my child? Okay, when don't they have to deal with it? It makes me think of Tamar Rice, who was a child, and unfortunately, it just makes me think of him, how young he was, and constantly hearing, we don't know what happened before. I don't know. I get where her passion is. I get where she's coming from. I totally understand. I don't know. And we have these conversations. I think it's so important to have these conversations. But I completely understand how understanding turns to anger, Yeah.
Okay. So I appreciate the comment. And like I said, just if nothing else, this is just an opportunity, a sounding board, just an opportunity for people to voice their feelings. A lot of times we see these stories on the news and we really don't have anybody to talk to it about. So now I see people in here from all over the state. We got some North Jersey, some South Jersey. I saw somebody from Florida logged in. So there's a cross section of people. We have some law enforcement people. We had a few attorneys on. So just people that are here for a common reason. They recognize that maybe there's something wrong and what can we do about it? Diamond.
Yes, thanks for taking this question again. I feel like I'm about to take up so much time, but because you created this space, I just want to say that I feel like we always see the accountability, and this is just my opinion. We see the accountability after the tragic has happened, after a Black person has lost their lives senselessly. I just recently, I forgot the woman who accidentally thought she pulled her taser and ended up shooting the young man, and she only got I think 2 years or something like that and $1,000 fine, right? So when we're talking about Black children, Black men, Black women, just fearful of law enforcers who is supposed to be serving and protecting, and we see something like 2 teenagers get into a fight and how they handle it. I'm kind of tired, I hate to say it that way, tired of having the same conversation, and we see small movements of change, right? We're so far behind the 8 ball saying, oh, well, there's some changes happening. We see some people being accountable. What I'm saying is we don't see enough people, especially law officers, accountable for the conduct that they have on the public and how they handle people and how they manage a situation. We're often told to look at, well, we don't know what happened. The truth be told, I'm not sure how many people care what happened that we didn't hear. What we care about is what we saw. That's what we care about. We're responding to what we saw. We don't want to assume, did somebody call a gun? He had something on him. It's easy to resort to that. It's easy to go in that direction, to excuse or make an excuse until we can get more information. And oftentimes we still don't get the truth out of that. So I understand having these town hall meetings or having a conversation, educating ourselves, having a voice and being heard. But again, if this conversation isn't continued, if it's not spread out through community, and if it's not holding people accountable and not making excuses for what we saw, we're going to see this and continue to see this throughout before we see major change. That's just my view about it and the people I'm having conversations with.
All right. Like I said, the wheels change. If you look at, I mentioned 1997 versus today, it's different. If you look at 1977 versus 1997, so changes. 1967, the police were agents of the government for hatred. And so, yes, are we there? No, not even close. Are there still, and I don't want to use bad apples because nobody wants to hear that. We just have to do a better job policing ourselves. Not to say, no pun intended, but yes, the police, we have to make sure that we get the right people in the seats at the right time to do the best job that they can. And like everybody's mentioned, when that job isn't performed, then they need to be accountable. And accountability isn't always prison or termination. There's a lot between there, just like everybody has a job. And there are times when you mess up at your job, everybody was going to get fired for everything. And a lot of times it's easy to say, all right, they did this, they should be terminated. Well, we have to see, yes, maybe they violated a policy and it was wrong. And we need to do A, B, and C to correct their behavior. But no, it didn't rise to the level of them losing their jobs. But when people should lose their jobs, absolutely. And I see what you mean, Diamond, where it's disheartening, where we hear the instances where people, we perceive them as getting off. And a lot of times perception is reality. There's a lot of nuances in the law that, like, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not even familiar with, but I know that one word, shall versus should, changes the whole statute. Could versus might changes the whole statute. So a lot of times it's the technicalities that allow people to get off. Again, continue the dialogue, continue the discussion. And that's what we're doing tonight. Anybody else? All right, let me check.
Hey, Jared, I put my hand back up. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Oh, you're not driving anymore?
No, I'm home. Okay. No, I'm home. So, I think everybody makes a very valid point, and I'm definitely in agreement with the last person that spoke about the repetition of the conversation. So I think it's important to have the conversation like you're pointing out, but I think the repetition of it is wearing us down. So we want to stop talking about it and change it and, see what can be done to help change how this whole thing happens, how the mind automatically thinks of us as feeling that we're more aggressive or that we're more harmful than other people. Now, I was thinking, as I was listening to this on my ride home, I was thinking about the psychological testing that is done to become a police officer. I took that years ago. I'm not going to say how long. I'll be giving too much away. So anyway, I took that a long time ago. And one of the things that I remember about the psychological testing is, how generic it is. And I was in New York at the time when I did this. And I'm thinking, like, well, is there something that maybe can be done on a psychological end? Like when the officers, because you said something about recruiting the right people. So what is the right people, right? So what are they? What do they look like? Are these people that do not have implicit bias? Are these people that can check their implicit bias when they feel it's coming in a situation? Because you also have to look at the way it is, right? The police officers, like you already stated, we probably feel like they were already in the area for something else. They may have been hyped up depending on what that was about. They got there in a very short period of time. So now they have to think quickly. So if you're thinking quickly and you got to respond to a situation, how are you going to be able to take that half a second, that split second and say, okay, I need to look at this situation differently because whatever, I can't look at it because it's a white boy and a black boy. It's two boys in a fight. How do I, respond to the situation? So what would be the right person to recruit? And then how will we make sure that that's the case? Because we know people can fudge the psychological. We know that. We know that people know how to answer the question the right way in order to get accepted into the job and then bring their prejudices with them. That's my question.
Okay. So I think the right person, I don't think there is one particular mold. Like you can't say, okay, the right person fits in this box and they need to be this shade, between this shade and this shade. No, the right person is the person that you feel you're or you can kind of program to be able to go out and employ their critical thinking skills. You mentioned split second decisions. Yes, like a lot of things are split second. You've got to, do I shoot, not shoot? Do I use force on this person? Do I not use force? Do I stop this car? Do I stop that car? So you have to kind of wade through it and say, okay, why am I making these decisions? And I want the person that's going to be able to make the best decision based not on color or any of the protected classes, because that's really what gets us in trouble. Sexual orientation, race, gender, and the testing is supposed to identify that. Again, I'm not a psychologist, so I've taken plenty of the tests. but I don't know exactly what the test tells them. I'm thinking it says they're more susceptible to do this or more likely or have the possibility of. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, but I know there is one on the, there's a forensic psychologist on the line if he wants to comment. But the testing process is supposed to weed those people out. And sometimes they slip through the cracks. But then you have the other layers that I mentioned, the training, supervision, and policy. So the policy make sure that that's what should bind them. And they say, okay, I have to operate within these policies. These are my boundaries. And when you step outside of those boundaries, that's when supervision comes in and says, hey, we set these boundaries because we've identified what good policing is. And we've identified what good operations are. And if you step outside of this circle, well, now you're outside of those bounds and we have some recourse. So now supervision gets involved. So it's not just, again, it's not just one facet. The test is one facet. You try to get the right people in the door. And if some people slip in, then hopefully they get caught in the dragnet from the other processes. Back to Terrell.
Thank you, Jared. I just wanted to agree with you. And again, it's not one magic bullet that's actually going to solve this in a day, a year, even 20 years for that matter. But I think to your comment, Donna, with the repetition thing, repetition helps. We may not want to see it as far as in our time, but you got to admit there are more conversations we're having now than it was 5 years ago. There's even more conversations that we're having 2 years ago. And just me being a police officer, like, you know, we train in repetition. We get the repetition in our reps because as many repetitions you have, it becomes second nature. So bridged with that and me being a police officer, again, as Jared, like as a Black man and the other brothers who are on here now, there was no greater conflict within me because either I was too blue for the uniform, or I'm sorry, too Black for the uniform or too blue for the guys I grew up with in Camden. So it was always trying to like maintain that balance, and that balance had to come through as far as communication with the guys, as far as growing up with, knowing that the guy that they see before him, like, you know, when you see Terrell out on the street, you know, we know we're going to get a fair shake. We're not going to be like on some rah-rah thing or anything is going to be extra. And I think that's a lot what's missing as far as from this profession now. A lot of these newer officers, and again, this is just Terrell Watkins speaking. It's not everybody, but a lot of officers are feeling that challenge to like actually connect with the communities that they're actually serving. It's difficult. And again, Camden Metro was able to like beat it in their heads where it was almost second nature because literally that was all we did. That was all they did. So when you have that type of repetition, it kind of like breaks down those stereotypes. And is it going to weed everybody out? Absolutely not. I mean, because we still had other officers who was racial in their profiling and things of that nature. And to Jared's credit, when you had those other accountability layers, like, you know, the supervision and things of that nature, it was able to kind of catch those things and weed it out. But again, it's going to take that collective effort and that continual basis as far as like getting that out with the conversations that we're having here, as far as through training, not just through law enforcement aspects, but like in the community. Like I said, you could be working for the corner bodega in the store or like on the corner, or I mean, Campbell Soup, wherever, but it takes those conversations that we got to have to kind of break these things down, and then maybe we get a better understanding, and then through the better understanding, we could probably move the ball a little bit more forward, because again, it's been moved a lot further than in my career. And again, I've had a 26-year career, but even through my last 8-year career through Camden County Metro, we literally did things above and beyond things that I did 20 years ago. And that was literally in that small 8-year span. So with that being said, and anything is possible, I'm just a big fan of the repetition thing. I didn't mean to shoot it down, Ms. Donna, but in those cases, I think it is really beneficial as far as for the departments to actually use that. So thanks for your follow-up comment.
Yes. Did you see the look on my face? Okay, no, I didn't take that as you trying to shoot it down at all, Terrell. But what I'm saying, and as you were talking, I'm saying to myself, but I'm a big fan of making some, let's see how I want to put this, some concrete steps. I'm a big fan of, I understand that repetition. I'm a big fan of repetition. I know as a facilitator of a mental health support group that we talk about things constantly over and over again, because the families that we deal with, sometimes they need to hear the information and the stuff that we talk about over and over again. So I understand that. But I also feel that you also have to put steps in place. You have to start going towards a goal, right? So we're talking about it because we want to bring more awareness, which we're doing. We're having more conversations, which we've had before, which we're doing. So what steps? We need to take steps. My church, who is in Somerset County, First Baptist of Lincoln Gardens, they are out for these officers' heads. I'm gonna tell you, they're out for it. I mean, because it's like they went out and protested on Saturday about it, and want to have conversation about holding these officers accountable, because like Jared pointed out, we could look at things a certain way, we see things a certain way, and then we respond to it that way. So if you want us to respond to it differently, or if we need to have a different conversation, then we need to take steps to know what that looks like. That's where I'm at with it. I want to know what it looks like. I want to be able to say, okay, we're working towards doing this.
Tangible and visible.
Right, exactly.
Know that we're actually moving the ball forward.
Right.
All right. So I think a big part of policing, and I took a diversity, equity, and inclusion course online that I finished about a month ago. And something that I learned, we all learned the golden rule. And it was treat others the way you want to be treated, and do unto others how you want them to do unto you. And I actually learned that there's a new golden rule. And they say, treat people the way they want to be treated, not how you want to be treated. So you say, oh, do unto others how you want to be treated. So the new golden rule is, no, treat people the way that they want to be treated. And I heard that and it was like, poof, mind was blown. I was like, man, it took 100 years to come up with a new golden rule, but it makes sense. Yes, people just want to be treated fairly. Like I want to go into, almost said the name of the supermarket, and I want to go in there and not get followed around by loss prevention. Like I just want to get some crab legs and a box of cereal and not have somebody follow me around because they think I'm in there to steal something. So that's how I want to be treated. So I really don't even care how you want to be treated. And a lot of times it's not the perspective, like perception is reality. So if I feel like I was wrong, then a lot of times, regardless of what you say or what you don't say, is usually even more damaging. And then those are tough to get over. So a lot of times, like law enforcement agencies, what you don't say can be more damaging than what actually happened. If you just let an incident go, and I know there's an investigation, but eventually that investigation is going to be closed. And if you think, all right, well, hopefully they'll have forgotten about it by the time it's closed, or it's going to be 2 months from now, 3 months from now, and this will be so yesterday because we're on the 72-hour news cycle and things just get recycled from our brains. No, people remember. And Ms. Donna, your church is going to remember that. A month from now, they're not going to be like, oh, all right, that was over. The rest of the country, yeah, this was a national story. The rest of the country, that was Saturday. It's already not a national story. But in Somerset County, this could change law enforcement community relations for a generation, because now you've got a 15-year-old and a group of 15-year-olds, and that's what they saw. That was their encounter with the police, and that's going to be etched in their brains until they have something to replace it. And I think as law enforcement, it's up to us to give them something positive to replace that image with. And it's not, again, Terrell mentioned magic beans or magic bullets. No, you're not just going to toss one magic bean in and now everything miraculously disappears. So they've got to put some work in. Even if it turns out that something happened before we got there and the officers acted in accordance with policy, the community is still hurt and the community deserves to be rebuilt. So you have to dangle that olive branch and reach out. The department reach out to the community reach out to the department, and determine how they're going to work through this, how we can proceed to make it better. Because again, us, not it's not just them or us versus them. We need to be in it together. And I just saw trauma. And exactly what I said. So somebody just put in the chat box that it can create trauma for a long time, and absolutely. And it takes a lot to rebuild. So they have to heal from it. You can create an atmosphere that ripples because everybody saw the video, and then one person tells one person and kind of whisper down the lane. So when we do identify the situations, we've got to not just talk about them. The first step is the conversation, but then what can we do to repair or rebuild? Those are the subsequent steps. And I had something written down. Oh, fair. Everybody wants to be treated fairly. And I was in the mall. This is years ago. I'm in the mall with my wife, and a guy across the way, he's yelling, "Yo, Broadway!" And looking, and I don't recognize him. So he finally runs over, and he's like, "You remember me?" I'm like, "No, not really." I said, "Remember, I was at Walmart and I was stealing, and you arrested me?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I remember him now." And my wife's like, "I can't believe this man just chased you across the mall to talk about when you arrested him." I told her, I said, "If you're fair with people, then he knew that he had done whatever he did. Like, he was stealing. I'm the police. Somebody called me. So yeah, he chased me across the mall to talk, and then told my wife that I arrested him because I was fair with him. And I didn't treat him poorly. I did just like I would do to anybody else. He got handcuffed, he got searched, he got fingerprinted and photographed, and I don't even remember if he went to jail or if he got released. But it's all about treating people fairly. And when they can walk out the door of that police station, take the handcuffs off, and they were like, "You know what? I messed up, but that officer treated me fairly," then I think the police have done something right. So the chat box is clear. This was a good dialogue. I'm glad everybody signed on. I hope you heard something that either answered some questions or gives you a little bit of hope that we're moving in the right direction. Just know that change isn't going to happen overnight. And Martin Luther King said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." And like we're seeing that bend. And I think Minneapolis, somebody mentioned a paradigm shift. The Minneapolis incident a couple years ago, that was just so overtly terrible that it's like the whole country finally said, "Okay, now we see it." If only for that situation. Like, that was the first time you ever heard major police chiefs from departments of thousands of miles away saying, "This was wrong. This isn't how we police." And that's good. Now for the smaller incidents, we need similar responses. And you're not going to get a big national response for every incident, but those regional responses, those local responses, that's what we need to do to make sure that we're reaching out to the communities and trying to make things better. So accountability, trust, fairness, impartiality, those should be all of the takeaways from the day. So before we jump off, does anybody else have anything they'd like to add? Let me put my info up one more time. If you think of something later, I don't know where. Oh, here we go. If you think of something later, I'll put my email address up. You can give me a call, shoot me an email, and we will go from there. Or maybe I won't. Put my info back up. Okay, maybe I won't do that. Here, I'll put my email address in the chat box for anybody. I had a slide with all of it. It looked pretty, and now I don't know what happened. And it looks like Paul Hauser is starting to type something in the chat box. All right, so jbroadway@vitalitysite.com. If anybody has any questions, you want to follow up, or if you want to continue the conversation, I just want to thank you for coming out and having this discussion. And I guess I can't figure out why there's a half a black box over my face, but it's the end of the presentation, so I'm good with that. So let me move this back.
Thank you for putting this together. I hope you're going to put another one together later. Maybe after the investigation, we can talk again.
So you,
Good idea.
Somerset County, it's going to be fresh in your mind for a long time. So I want you.
Actually, I live in Burlington. I live in Burlington. My church is Somerset. I used to live in Somerset,
Okay.
but I live in Burlington. I'm South Jersey.
Okay. So you're down here now. All right. Well, then your churches. So you can still hit me up, send me an email, and we'll talk about it, see what we can come up with.